Yeah, and I'm trying to listen to you.
Wait, what was the question? Yeah.
Unmute.
I just unmuted. Picking up my voice.
Okay,
And the clicker works.
okay. And the video too, or no?
Oh, right, yeah, then we
Okay.
can do that.
So when I get ready to afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our 2:30 session today. I'm going to throw up the land acknowledgement statement and just say I hope you guys enjoyed your time here these last 2 days. It's been really great for me, and I hope it's been that same way for you as well. So today we've got managing fruitful research collaborations with external partners, and our presenters are Joelina Peck, who is the Associate Director of Research Operations in the School of Electrical and Engineering, Energy Engineering at, and we've got Ochsner here, the Assistant Director of Postal Work here in OSB at NAU.
So hello, thanks for joining us today for this session. Today we're going to talk about managing fruitful research collaborations with external partners. And I'm with my partner, I'm Ivan. So today we have some learning objectives for everybody. You will leave here having an understanding of the potential challenges that arise when you're working with domestic and/or international collaborators. We hope to share some best practices for both pre-award and post-award perspective with partners, regardless of organization type. And we hope to have helpful tips and best practices for sub-recipient monitoring. So I wanted to get a poll for everybody online and everybody in the room. What brought you to this session? What to take away? Like, what are some of the things that you might be challenging or struggling with at this time? So we hope to kind of also be sure to address those concerns. Feel free to pop in chat if anybody online would like to share what brought you in today.
In the Q&A.
In the Q&A, yeah. If you're nervous, you feel free to shout out. Anybody just wanting to learn on the international?
Community partners.
Okay, community partners. Great. Has anybody had the opportunity to work with any international partners on projects? Yeah. Our online participants very quiet today. That's me. Thanks, Joelina. Okay. So I think one of the most important things that I have realized is really pivotal when you are going to work with an external partner, whether you're developing a proposal or you're working on an award, it's really important that you understand the organizational type that you're working with, right? Each of these organizational types are very different in a lot of ways. In some ways they're similar, right? But this is going to lead the way to give us little piece of information that we're going to want to keep in the back of our mind, because it can be simple things that can create issues and challenges that if you kind of already know a lot about the organization type that you're working with, you can already start creating your action plan of what you need to do and what questions you need to start asking to move your project forward or to move your proposal forward. So these are some of the common types of organizations that I have worked with. If there's anything up here that you have out here that's not up here, please feel free to let me know. But these are some of the major organizational types that I have worked with often in my role as a research administrator. So we're going to go over each of these organizations, and we're going to talk about some of the potential challenges that could arise, right? When you're thinking about these organizations, what types of issues or things could potentially be problematic that could delay your project or could delay your proposal. So universities and other nonprofit organizations, they're not too challenging. Usually when working with academic partners, we kind of speak the same language. We know. So if we're working with NAU or U of A or working with Purdue or any academic institution, we pretty much have similar processes, procedures. We kind of speak the same language. So those are really easier collaborations for us as a research administrator. But sometimes the problems can be varying organizational structures. We're all set up very differently, right? Some of us are distributed role model, some of us are centralized, some of us are only centralized and they have no support in the units. It's just the faculty running rogue, doing their own budgets and doing their own things and then sending it up to their sponsored projects office. So sometimes it can be very challenging to figure out who are you working with and who can help you understand, like, how does your organization work with? If I'm working with a faculty member, is that who I should be working with? Or is there somebody that I should be talking to, like either in your central office or on your team or in your department, right? Strict timelines ASU is not a lucky organization that has a strict timeline. We let people up to the deadline. We will help them any way we can to get that proposal submitted. But I have come across some organizations and some nonprofits that have very strict deadlines. If we're a subaward and collaborating with them, we have to have our documents to them within their timeline, or that proposal doesn't go forward. And so that's something that I want to know ahead of time, because I need to make sure that I have the time commitment to be able to meet the deadlines that they may have for their institution. Some organizations have to cover all their expenses. So if we're working with a sponsor that has limited indirect cost or may require cost share or those types of things, that can be problematic for some institutions. Some institutions are not able to cost share. And so if you're going to apply to a funding opportunity that has cost share or has some kind of limited F&A, you want to make sure that the organization you're partnering with is going to be able to honor that, right? Because you need to have those discussions before you get into the hard work of building that proposal. And then we also have state and federal laws. So if there's certain restrictions or things like that, sometimes there's issues with negotiation of state laws in these agreements. And also all universities usually have to publish all results. So if there's any restrictions on publications, that could be problematic for us. So the next institution or organizational type that we work with is industry or small business. And these ones seem to be the most challenging for me, at least in electrical engineering, because our faculty do a lot of work with companies. And companies and academics are like oil and water. Like, we don't speak the same language. And so I know if I'm partnering with an industry partner, it's going to take a lot of time for me to kind of get on the same page with that industry partner. And it's not going to be via email. I'm going to have a phone call with them. I'm going to have a Zoom meeting or something where we can sit face to face and we can talk about all the potential challenges. Most of the industry we work with, they don't have experience in grants or proposals or submission. Especially small businesses, it's usually their CEO or some technical person on their team that's working on this proposal. And so they need a lot of guidance. They need a lot of support from me. And so I have to make sure that I have that bandwidth and that time to support them. So that's something I'm going to want to know. Do they have previous experience with working with this agency? They have different objectives, right? Industry is looking to make a profit. They're looking to advance their technology. They're looking for other things. Academics is looking for learning and teaching and coaching. And so sometimes those can be conflicts. So you have to make sure that when industry, they understand the federal government regulations and that if there's any intellectual property going to be shared, right? They're not going to be able to own that intellectual property. There could be different issues coming up with property for your industry partners. Financial systems. I'm always concerned that industry businesses don't have the financial systems in place to be able to truly make a federal award. And I can tell you that most of the time we budgeted industry partners as a sub-award, it gets funded and it turns out that we cannot sub to them sub-award. They cannot accept the federal terms. They don't have the systems in place. They don't have all these things. And so guess what? Usually it's with the Department of Energy and they had cost share committed in their budget and now they have to be a vendor and they can't do cost share. ASU has to think about the cost share that they were supposed to cover. And so these are things that you want to think about with the industry type when you start that proposal or you're getting into Gauge. Ask yourself these questions, especially if you know cost share is part of the requirement. Looking through that funding opportunity as well, making sure, are there any restrictions on IP? Are there any things you think might be problematic? Bring to their attention. Don't assume that your industry partner is going to read that funding opportunity. They're not. So usually in my conversations, if I'm partnering with them, I'm going to send them an email that's going to bring their attention. I'm going to reference the page number in the FOA in the specific section I want them to read. So I want to point them to those sections that are most important, that I want to talk about now. Intellectual property is one of those. If there's cost share, if there's budget restrictions, things like that. I want to know, what do you think about this? What concerns do you have? How are we going to? Companies have limited space and resources. Right? So we need to make sure that whatever's being proposed for them, that they have these in the space to do that. So talking about small businesses, sometimes they're in the garage of somebody's house. Hopefully they're advancing and they're growing and they're trying to get their startup moving. But those are real things that happen. And so we need to make sure that they're capable of performing the reach that we're partnering with, right? We're going to be responsible as the lead on this project. And also, most of them don't have an F&A rate agreement, right? And so sometimes they want to ask for all the overhead of 100%. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. You can only ask for 10%, but it's for the minimum, unless you negotiate a rate, right? And so that's usually problematic for them too, because again, they're like, no, we need more money than that. I'm like, well, that's all the federal government will allow you to have. And so again, if you're doing a proposal and it's close to the deadline, how much time do you have to have these conversations with them, right? So organizational type is so important when you're considering and who you're partnering with. Hospitals and medical organizations, again, organizational structure, again, hospitals are very different. They have different types of setups. Sometimes they do have a central sponsored projects office where they do grants and stuff, and that's great when they have them. But again, sometimes it's really confusing on who you're working with and how you reach that person and where to go to connect with them. And are they aware that this is happening? Because usually it's the professor connecting with the other professor or doctor or researcher. And so we're trying to back into who at your institution is your authorized official that I need to know so I can make sure that we have the right people. Some time constriction for doctors, right? When you're working with physicians, they're busy, they're seeing patients, they're not easily readily available like our faculty are. Well, some of our faculty. And so you have to make sure that if you're partnering with somebody at a medical institute, that doctor is going to be responsive, or whomever is working with them is going to be responsive to respond to your questions, to get back to you. So that's something you might want to keep in mind as well. It's like, how hold of you, how I get an answer from you if I'm collaborating with you and I need information from you, but you're non-responsive. Again, medical facilities have different than academics, and also compliance protocols can come into play, making sure that you have the right compliance protocols and you're, again, reaching the right people to make sure that they're aware that there's, protocols and compliance at their institution for the proposal that you're submitting. National laboratories or federal laboratories, again, they have a different organizational structure. Sometimes they have to submit fieldwork proposals, which have to go through a whole process at their institution, which takes time for them to get that through. So you have to make sure you notify them early enough so they can get with their people internally to get that fieldwork proposal together. And sometimes they might need special approval. So you need to make sure that you understand what types of approval they need to go to, who they are, if the person you're working with at the federal lab sending this up to you, is there going to be somebody else at the federal lab that you should be in touch with working with them? International organizations. Oh, geez. There's lots of stuff that come with working with international organizations. They have very different, unique organizational structures, right? There's jurisdictional issues. What country laws are we following? That can be very problematic too. Certain countries have laws that they will not, budge on, and the United States has laws that we won't budge on as well. And so that takes time to have those conversations to see, are we able to collaborate? Is there something that we can work together on this? They're unfamiliar with our requirements for our requirements and regulations. So a lot of time we're spending a lot of time helping them understand what's allowable, what's not allowable, what we can do, what we can't do. And that takes time. Communication barriers. Again, you think you understand what they're saying, but really you're not. They mean something completely different. And so it takes some time to build those relationships with them to try to get on the same page, in hopes that you are understanding and know what your objectives are and that you both are accomplishing the same goals. Cultural barriers, making sure that it's important that we are respectful and we're knowledgeable of not doing anything that may offend them, not intentionally, right? I mean, I had to go when I was working on my international project, I had to go and read about the culture to make sure that I was respectful and how I communicate with them and what the expectations when communicating with them. So I felt more comfortable when I was talking with them. I wasn't doing anything that would destroy our relationship from the very beginning, not intentionally knowing that. And so I would say that's very, very important for you to build those relationships. With the country that I was working with, they're a very social country. And I was all about the business. We have a timeline, we got to get it done, let's go. And they were kind of like, whoa, let's get to know each other first. Let's have some talk, like, who's your family? Where are you from? And that was unusual for me because that's not usually when I'm having conversations about objectives and work and timeline. It doesn't really include my personal stuff, but that was something that was important to them. And they wanted to know about who they were working with and who I was as an individual. And so it was very different. And so it's something that I never had considered before, but now it's very important to me that if I'm working with another culture or international organization, I'm going to go do some research on that country too, so I know. Time zone differences, that's the hardest. It was night, it was day, it was night. So we're always 24 hours behind each other. And sometimes we had to stay up late to have those face-to-face meetings. So it's a commitment, right? Like I had to stay up till 2 in the morning so I can have this meeting with them because it needed to be a face-to-face meeting. It couldn't be an email meeting. So again, it's thinking about the time that you have available and the importance of those relationships and making sure that you're willing to commit to be able to ensure that whatever it is you're working on is successful. And then the gross currency conversions, I hated it. We were always trying to figure out how much money it really was because we were converting their currency into US currency, and then it was currency and then back, and I couldn't tell, I'm like, is this really right? I was really uncomfortable. Like, I've never had to do this before. So that was one of the challenges that we have, is really understanding currency rates and conversions and the differences between and works, and what do we use about action. Okay, moving on. Consultants. Consultants, they have difference in project needs, right? They're supposed to be on an as-need basis. Sometimes their rates are very high, and they get very offensive if we try to question or ask them to back up or kind of demonstrate like where they got their rate from. And they're like, because that's my rate. And I'm like, I'm not saying your rate is wrong. I just need to be able to prove the reasonable rate. So can you help me by giving me some stuff? And so we've had some problems there because, you know, what they were providing wasn't sufficient enough for us to be able to say that that was a reasonable rate for what was being asked to do. So, and there's some sensitivity there, right? Because we don't want our partners to feel like we're questioning their values or questioning their business, but it's something that we have to do on our end to ensure that we're doing allowable, allocable, and reasonable, right? There's tax implications. Sometimes I think that consultants forget that they're responsible for paying the taxes on the funds that they receive. They also don't have any rights to the data. You know, they're not significant to the project. They're not directly involved in determining how that project goes. And so they really don't have any rights to any of the data or information that's being developed. And so if they want that, and if they feel that they need that, then they should probably be a subrecipient, right? They provide their own materials and tools. So consultants are like, well, I'm going to use so-and-so's lab at your institution. And like, well, you're a consultant. You should be able to have your, like, what resources are you doing benchmarks with? I don't think that's it. So again, it's asking those questions when those things come up. And again, they're not responsible for forming or reporting the research. So when your investigator's like, well, my consultant's going to give me the reports for this and that, good luck getting those reports because we have no way of enforcing them to give us those reports. So again, if you need those types of things, it's that conversation early on. It's like, are you truly a consultant or should you be a subrecipient? Okay, so a few things here is to summarize your expectations. So some of the do's is do highlight requirements and regulations. If it's something that's important that could be a potential issue and may take time to resolve or talk about, be sure to point those out early on. Highlight them, direct them to the funding opportunity or to the award agreement to point out to them, like, we need to talk about these things and what concerns there might be so we can start tackling those. Establish a rapport, relationships. That's been a theme pretty much throughout this conference, is relationships are so important. That's really, truly how we accomplish things, right? Is through our relationships. Providing clear expectations with deadlines. Do provide templates or examples. If I'm working with a partner, especially industry, I do not assume that they will know what I'm asking for. Like even BioSketch, if there's a template for a BioSketch, I'm going to send them that template for the BioSketch. If there's no template for a BioSketch, I'm going to create one to send it to them. I know that if you give them the documents that you want from them, they will give them back to you. Even letters of support, letters of collaboration, I should say. Like if you have requirements in there where you don't want them to give you some letter that's very iffy. It's like, this project is wonderful and we're going to do all these amazing things. And you're like, I can't use this letter. Give them a template. Provide the language you want them to give you. Don't assume that they know what it is that you need. That will always help those relationships because they'll be appreciative that you provide them all the information and resources and the details that they needed to be able to complete what they needed to do on their end. And then consistently check in. Make sure that you're checking in and following up. I think sometimes we send out that email and we're on to other things and we forget sometimes and we're just waiting for our deadline to come. Sometimes it's nice just to check in to remind them because all of a sudden you'll realize that like, oh yeah, I did have a question. Or yeah, I did need to ask you this. And so again, it's helping you to feel more comfortable with reaching out to you because you're reaching out to them. Some of the don'ts is don't assume they understand what's needed. Don't assume that they'll read the FOA. That's very important, especially if that FOA is like 113 pages. Like they're not going to read it. So summarize it for them, pull out all the important information that you want them to know, and give them the page numbers for the FOA so they can go specifically there and read it. Don't delay in responding to questions or concerns. If they have a question or concern, address it right away. Make sure you make the time to do that, because the faster you get back to them, the more they can keep on track with getting the information that you requested. And don't provide unrealistic expectations. If you know it's something that you can't meet or that you wouldn't be able to meet, don't expect your partners to do that as well. So some communication strategies that I use is, again, Zoom or phone calls are sometimes way better than email. You can accomplish a lot if you schedule a meeting. Even if your schedule is really busy, I can tell you that you can get a lot accomplished faster in a phone call or a Zoom call than you can in an email. Sometimes, especially if your email is getting kind of lengthy with all the things you're pointing out to them, I always say if it's more than a paragraph, you probably want to have a phone call. Again, set clear goals and expectations, make sure that it's clear as to what you need, be available for questions, listen to their concerns. If they have concerns, it's probably going to be something that you need to make sure either you elevate it up in your institution to figure out how do we address their current concerns, how do we make them feel better about what it is that we're trying to do. And then try to find creative ways to accomplish things together. When I was working on my international project, there was a lot of creativity that happened, and it just wasn't one-sided. I also have to listen to what they were saying and some of the suggestions and seeing where we could meet in the middle to compromise in some of the action items that we had. And so for pre-award, I just wanted to kind of point, this is kind of the strategy that I use for pre-award: review, plan, request, and facilitate. These are like the primary steps of proposal development. That funding opportunity review is going to be very important, because that's what all the information is that you need from all your partners. You are the one responsible for telling your partners. I really don't like it when I get piecemeal. Like when I get a request to partner with somebody and they're like, I need your bio sketch and your current and pending. Great, I'm on it. And I send it out and they're like, oh, and I need your budget and I need this form and that form. Okay, great. And then, by the way, can you send me? And I'm like, please, could you just send me everything that you want from me in one email? So I try to repay the favor with how I would expect something to be sent to me. I'm going to send that to my partners, right? I'm going to anticipate to know everything I need from them, and I'm going to give that to them: the title, the performance period, who my PI is, who my contact is. Like, give them everything that they need to be able to do what it is you're asking. And I can tell you, your results will be phenomenal. Like, people will give you back what you asked for. But if you ask them to figure it out on their own, or you don't give them any clues, it's going to be rough. And with that, I will turn it over to Joelina.
All right, so after Joelina and her team have negotiated and started a great relationship with our partner, their partner, now that relationship needs to be codified in terms of a contract. And so in general, we're looking at two major types of agreements that we work with. And my talk would be mostly focused on the subawardee relationship. That's where the post-award world has the most interactions with our partners. So at this point, hopefully in the proposal process, and there's been a pretty good determination of what will be the nature of the agreement. But when the rubber hits the road, once that award comes into the pass-through entity to us, we need to make a good determination of what is the right sort of agreement to have with this partner. And so some things to be watching out for and working with your contracting team is a sub-awardee typically will have more intellectual engagement with the project. They are likely going to be a key personnel in the nature of the agreement. They will have more programmatic influence over the nature of the research, over the nature of the award, how it's going down. Their work is going to be measured, their performance is going to be measured in the level of success of the overall project. Whereas contractors, thank you, contractors are going to have a much lesser role in the action of the award. They're essentially providing services that feed into the nature of the overall award, but not having a lot of influence over the larger scope of work. A contractor typically is providing a service to the award that is part of their day-to-day operations. You might think of it as buying a service off the shelf or an object off the shelf, rather than being part of the creative process and the deeper research level of most research projects that we work with. Consultants or contractors, they act at the discretion of our PI. So our PI is directing what's happening, what we want from them, and directing, what sort of service or what deliverable we get from them. Whereas with the subawardees, they have a lot more control over what they're doing, a lot more creative input into the project. A subawardee typically will publish their own results or be co-authors with the publications that happen with us, with our PIs. Yeah. So at this point, once we've helped working with our teams, we've determined what is the right sort of arrangement, the right sort of agreement with them. And the contracting team needs to vet our collaborators. Again, hopefully a lot of this has already been worked out in the pre-award stage, so we don't have any surprises. But again, our contracting team needs to make sure that we've collected all the appropriate documents that that Joelina and her team have helped develop over the course of the proposal. Make sure that we have all of the assurances, the budget and the justification, copies of the negotiated rate agreement, assure that they are registered with SAM.gov, reviewed their recent audits, and to do a perform a risk analysis to determine what sorts of terms and conditions we need to write into that agreement. I'll talk about this a little bit later. Oftentimes there's a sense with folks that we haven't worked with much that we might want to write in extra requirements into our agreements, but we want to be careful with that. If we write in too many requirements or too strong of terms and conditions, it can be very burdensome for both entities. Not only, as the other institution, we expect them to meet those expectations, but if we write those expectations into our contracts, we as the pass-through entity have the obligation to make sure that they are meeting all of those requirements. And so it creates a lot of extra work, which can actually get in the way of the progress and the research that we're asking them to do. Some of the things that we're looking for at the vetting stage is to confirm that the folks we're collaborating with are truly qualified to do the work that we're asking them to do. And do they have established policies and procedures and sufficient internal control systems to segregate the funds and all of the things that we expect? Again, if we're working with another educational institution, again, we can feel pretty confident that they have those things already in place. But if we're dealing with an industry partner, or particularly, again, foreign recipients, these are things we need to make sure that, are we sure that we want to be engaging with these folks? And so after all that is done, we negotiate and issue the agreement, collect signatures. For me and our post-award team, I think it's important that we are, after the agreement is negotiated and signed, that we are completely aware, everyone is completely aware of what is the period of performance, what are the reporting requirements that we expect, what is the agreement on IP and ownership, and communicating these things, again, confirming these things with the other partners. For example, I know Sharon, we have worked with some particularly foreign collaborators that we provide them the template for, when you bill us, these are the things that we need. And we actually, we see our template coming back to us with the header is changed out, but they filled in the information exactly as we need it, so that we know that we can process that it fits the guidelines that are required of our sponsors, as opposed to the initial invoice that maybe came as, a bill without all the details that are required. So again, sharing that information ahead of time, so that communication can flow, particularly with small institutions or small foreign aid collaborators. They've done the work and they need to be paid. They need that funding, and it can be really problematic if we haven't had that communication ahead of time of, everything is great, we're happy with the work you're doing, but we need your invoice to look like this. We need you to do it a little bit differently, and that can be problematic in keeping those relationships positive. And again, here, if we added additional terms and conditions into the agreement, we need to be sure that we are, both sides are managing those additional terms and for all of our compliance needs. A note here, a new requirement from the NIH that I should have put the date on here, but a new requirement that recently came into play that NIH now requires that all new and existing sub-awards with foreign entities are required to include a term that requires the subrecipient to provide access to copies of all lab books, all data, and all documents that support the research outcomes described in the progress report to the primary recipient, us, with a frequency of no less than once per year. So this is an important additional step that's required on all NIH awards. And so, yes, again, so that we have that open flow of communication between the researchers, so that that information we as the pass-through entity can verify that the results that we're receiving from these entities, we have good support of the reports that they are of the data that they are providing to us, so that gets included in our reports to on up to the federal sponsors. At the time that we have a new contract in place, it's important that our institution, the pass-through entity, encumbers the funds, set up that purchase order right away. Again, a frustration that a lot of companies and collaborators have with working with large institutions like us is it seems like it can take forever to receive payment. And so one way that we can help keep the money flowing as it needs to is to be proactive about making sure that we have encumbered the funds, we've worked with purchasing, we've worked through all of those hurdles, so that when we get that first invoice, presuming it's good and we're ready to pay, we can cut that check right away. So for smaller institutions, I've had some communications with some folks, some talks with some folks here at this conference. It's important as an institution is growing to start making those determinations of who is responsible for all these different parts of keeping the relationships happening. So having a good relationship with our collaborators, who at your institution is responsible of being sure that the scientists are communicating regularly with each other, that we have good, clean, open, transparent communication. Who is monitoring whether the other institution, the other entity is following the rules, the guidelines that are flow down through the federal awards, through us to our collaborators. A good way to monitor that is by watching the spending. If the research is happening at the other institution, if the work is happening at the other institution, they should be there. And so if we're going into we're 6 months into a sub-agreement, 9 months into a sub-agreement, and we're not seeing any invoices yet, that could be a sign that things aren't really happening over there. Likewise, if we were 6 months into a 3-year agreement and they're billing us for 90% of the funds that we had agreed to, that could be a sign of trouble too. So again, it's keeping an eye on what's going on, and it may not be for a central office. We may not know, the details of all of the research of what's going on, but we can be monitoring the spending to see that it is flowing in a way that we anticipate and are comfortable with. Part of keeping that everybody happy is, as a pass-through entity, we are required to monitor annual audits, make sure that the other institution isn't doing things that could negatively affect our relationship, negatively affect the way that would reflect poorly through us to our federal sponsors. And so a call out here, again, coming back, I'm a post-board person, so I'm dealing with invoicing a lot. Some things that are required on that invoice that we receive from our partners. The invoices need to be individually, uniquely numbered. Again, that's something that a lot of smaller partners just don't know. So that we can keep good tracking of what are they billing us for, what is the time period that they are billing us for, what agreement number are they billing us for? That's a frustration that we often have, is we'll get we've got several sub-awards with a particular entity and they're not identifying what are they billing us for? Is this for PIA or PIB? Is it the NIH award? Is it the NSF award? So all of these things are required. They are flow-through requirements on federal awards. And so as the pass-through entity, these are things that we need to be monitoring and insisting from our partners, including a breakdown of the costs and identifying what period are they billing us for. So that is this the bill for February? Is the bill for December through February? That all needs to be included on those invoices. A breakdown of major cost categories: personnel, travel, operations, those sorts of things. If there's a cost shared piece of it, this is another thing for us in post-award. If there's a cost share piece to the sub-agreement, they should be indicating how are they meeting that cost share, their cost share commitment throughout the life of the award. And so we should be watching for that on every invoice, or at least at regular intervals, checking in with them. Are they meeting those requirements? Are they documenting those requirements? All invoice subrecipients per uniform, they are to have a certification statement that they're reasonable and align with terms and conditions to be signed by an authorized agent of that other entity. So this is an example of what we use in NAU OSP as part of our invoice, our subrecipient invoicing, subrecipient. So we, as when a new award is set up, we establish what we call a simple sub-award simple invoice analysis. And basically, we lay out the basic cost categories that we do with some places to expand, knowing that the award will change over time. And then as the invoices are coming in, we ask our subrecipients to send their invoices to the central office, and then a fund manager, like my friend Celeste back here, takes that invoice and tracks this information. What is the date of the invoice? What is the period that it's being billed? And a breakdown of the costs. And we also are analyzing the F&As that they are billing us to see that we agree with what they're billing. And it doesn't always align to the penny, but if it's close, we're good with that. Also, there are times, speaking of F&As, that the F&As may be off by quite a bit. They may feel like it's off quite a bit. We typically don't reach out immediately if that happens, because I recognize that when we're generating invoices, sometimes our F&As are not right. But we do track it over time, so that we give them the flexibility that over time it will probably work out, and most often it does. Another consideration is, at our institution, we have a very simple F&A structure that we apply our rate to all of our costs on a modified total direct cost basis. We're all familiar with that. But we also see that some of the partners that we work with, their F&A rates, particularly the federal labs, they don't work up an F&A rate. They have like a build structure. And so it's important to have a good understanding of who is the partner that we're working with. And I know when I was first doing some of this work as a fund manager, I'd get these bills from Los Alamos. I'm like, what is this? How did you come up with that? But lo and behold, that's the agreement that they have. That's the nature of how it works. And so having that understanding of who our partner is. I guess I skipped that on the other slide. Per uniform guidance, we are required to pay a valid invoice to our subrecipient partner within 30 days of receipt. And so that was a big shock to our system when that was implemented, because again, institutions like NAU are slow to cut checks. And so again, when you get that award in, to establish that purchase order, have all of those conversations with purchasing that's ready to go before you get that first invoice. So that when that invoice comes and it's valid, we can process that and we can meet that requirement of getting that payment out to the subrecipient within 30 days. And so again, this is a snapshot of our tracker that we use in the central office. We track when the invoice came in, the dollar amount, which unit is responsible for actually processing the payment. When did we forward that invoice to the unit for them to process, to get the PI approval and ask them to process payment on that? And then we keep a track of it. Are we meeting those deadlines? And since we started doing this, I look back and our hit rate has improved dramatically just by being aware of it. And so part of my role is periodically to go back and look at this and find these blank spots and say, hey, looks like we're missing a payment here. Fund manager Celeste, will you see that just didn't get tracked, or do we need to reach out to the unit and ask them to push that payment on before we start getting calls from our partners? Again, particularly small institutions, they need to function. And so setting up some simple systems like this can really help keep everybody happy. And then finally, as we start to get to the end of our award, which typically is going to be the end of our sub-agreement as well, we have a small window of time to close out sub-awards. The agencies give us, the prime recipient, 90 days or 120 days to close out our award, wrap up all the activities, pay all of the bills. We typically give 45 or 60 days after the end date for our subrecipient to get us their invoice, so that we can pay that within the 30 days, and that really fast. And so part of our closeout process is our fund managers reach out to our subrecipients at 60 days before the end date to say, hey, want to make sure you're aware of this. The end date is coming. Please confirm that you, and we send them this form. We review it, go through and check the things that we need from them. Please give us notification of what is your final invoice, what are your total expenses. All of that stuff, we communicate that out early, so that if there's any problems, that we've got time to deal with it before that 90-day window after the end date is starting to close on us. So we have those communications early so that we don't get into a place where we are stressing to meet all of our requirements. So ultimately, the pass-through entity, the NAUs, the ASUs that receive the major award and then sub award out to other partners, the responsibility to monitor all activities that are happening on the award here at our institution and also at our partner institution. We have the responsibility to assure compliance with sponsor terms and requirements, to collect and maintain relevant documentation, particularly about cost share and other scientific activities. We have the responsibility to report activities and outcomes to the sponsor. So again, our sub-awardee or our consultant, as Joelina, we shouldn't be waiting for our consultant to give us the report to submit. It is our responsibility as an institution to submit that information up to the sponsor. We have the responsibility to communicate clearly about all involved parties in the agreement, and ultimately to foster fruitful collaborations with external research. I think that's the end of our show. So we've got lots of time now. If there are questions or comments, audience here and online, please let us know. And we're going to be passing around the talking potato.
Perfect. I love that it's a purple talking potato. So I have a two-part question, one part for Joelina, and then I would like active as well. So yesterday in another session, Joelina and some of us in this room were talking about KPIs and things. Have you looked at, when you're looking at like a proposal complexity and workload, or, you know, what level you're hiring people, has the type of external collaborator on proposals, is that a part of what you're looking at all, or have you found ways to quantify it? I have so many questions about that. And then for Ivan, I'm also curious because I'm pre-award, so all of my experiences with pre-award, I know a lot of our heavy lifting with external partners are the types of organizations that are working with US federal government for the first time. So a lot of small business, a lot of international. Do you find that once they have been handed over to you and your team, have a lot of maybe the like federal specific vernacular, has that been built in a lot, or are you finding that you and your team are having to spend a lot of time to make sure that you're knowing when you ask information of these organizations, they know what you mean the first time? And is there still a learning curve there on the post awards? I mean, I'm sure there is, but what is the learning curve there as you're looking at assigning those types of projects out?
Okay. So yes, and I've been working for the last 6 months or so, at least, trying to figure out what metrics to put for pre-award, right? No proposal is equal to another proposal. There's lots of fluid things that are happening, but the partners do come into play. So we've decided to break it down in levels of complexity. And so if you have an international partner or industry partner, those ones increase the complexity. And so those would be like a level 4, level 5. And also sponsors that we know, like USAID, DOE, those sponsors also have a higher complexity because of the cost share commitments, because of, we know that the expectation of DOE is to have partners and small businesses. So yes, we are working on trying to see what that looks like, but the complexity does come in. So we probably wouldn't, or at least I wouldn't give somebody who was new to research administration a proposal that had industry and international partners right away. We would stick with the simple NSF, easy peasy lemon squeezy ones.
Yeah, so I would say for us at NAU, I typically kind of pass the buck a little bit on the collaboration with the partners, because I know that the scientific group are the folks that really have that relationship with the external partners. But I would say in general, a lot of the work that we do is doing that translation of what does all of that mean. And so I try really hard to not just throw out, 2 CFR 200.426, but say, these are the sorts of things that we need and why. Might include the link to it, so this is why. But we do try very hard to convert that language into common English for any partners we're working with, whether it's a sub-awardee or just another person on campus or a PI or an administrator. I think that's a part of our role, is to just be that translator, so that everybody can do their job and be productive.
Yeah, and I would add on to that at pre-award stage, we're limited by the amount of time that we have to do some of these things. And some of these things really take time. And that's why identifying the organizational type is already going to cue you in at proposal time as to what types of things possibly are going to be concerned. And so we're probably not going to figure out the IT issues, and we're probably not going to figure out some of these things by the time the proposal is submitted. But at least we can start those conversations with our institutional central office and with the PI and their PI, so that we can start having those conversations like, what does this look like if this gets funded? I think the most important thing is really the contracting type too comes into play a lot as well. As Ivan was saying, like, what mechanism are we going to use? So that should come into play at proposal time too, right? And I know ASU has a really cool sub-award recipient sort of packet, like what's expected of a sub-award. And I've often sent that to my sub-awards to give them background to like what we're going to expect, why we ask for these things. And so if you don't have one of those, I suggest that you'd probably be helpful to you to put that together. So when you're working with industry, again, it helps you put on that same level playing field, where they're now speaking your language and they know what you're asking and they know what it means. Or they can come back with questions like, what do you mean when you say overhead or indirect cost? Or what do you mean when you say cost share? You can have something to give them that they can refer to and kind of help bridge that gap, that communication challenges. It's going to help you streamline your proposal process as well, and make it easier for your post-award team when that award comes in for you to get the ball running and getting it set up. But great question. Thank you, Val. Any other questions? Do we have any online questions? No? Did you have one? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. My question, you may have already slightly addressed this during the presentation, but you mentioned kind of some of the situations where you think it's a subaward and then that doesn't work out because maybe they don't have the required financial oversight or small nonprofits that financial situation changes and they can't work on a reimbursement model, et cetera. Could you speak to if you have situations where that's happened and how you've navigated that and how it's turned out?
Great question.
I can just say, I think, yeah, that obviously that can have significant budgetary impacts on an award because, as I think everyone in the room is aware, we don't charge indirects on a sub-awardee beyond that first 25,000. And if it ends up being a $100,000 $100,000 consultant, that's going to carry a whole lot more FNAs than a $100,000 sub-award, and so that can be very problematic for sure. I don't know that I have any specific examples of that other than a lot of stress that happens on that. And honestly, I think, yeah, I think in some instances we end up doing the wrong type of agreement just because of the budgetary impacts. And so, which I think calls out why it's so important to make those determinations early in the proposals process so that it doesn't become a post-award concern. I appreciate somebody today gave their whole talk on all the things that are done in pre-award are really helpful for post-award. So I hope I'll refer you back to that.
It's really important, especially when you're partnering, to make sure you're budgeting them correctly. If it's a consultant, if it's a subrecipient, if it's a vendor, because it does have substantial impact on your budget. I did have an experience where we had budgeted an industry partner as a subcontract. The proposal was submitted, it was awarded. When we went to issue the agreement, the company came back and said, we just don't have the bandwidth to honor this. We can't track all the things we're expected to track. We can't do the reporting and the invoicing that you're asking us to do. And so we're like, oh boy, okay, it had cost share, right? And it was a substantial part. So the discussion was moving them to a vendor. And did that make sense? And could it be assertive? Again, and the work has to be able to support that, right? Because not only now do we have to go back to the sponsor to say, hey sponsor, what we propose is no longer valid. We have to now revise. And so we went back to the sponsor and there were several back and forth. We were able to compromise and be able to result in a vendor, but significant impact to the budget, right? Because vendors have full indirect when previously we only had IDC on the first 25K. Very stressful, right? And the PI for stressful because we wanted this relationship to work. We needed this company's involvement and we needed them to collaborate with us on proposal, but it was just not possible for them to do that. And not to mention ASU now had to figure out how to cover the cost share that the company was previously responsible for covering, because as a vendor, they cannot cost share, right? Because they're not significant contributors to the project. So we had to be creative in finding other ways to make up that cost share. So lessons learned from that one is, again, that's why it's so important if I'm working with an industry partner and I know already the organizational type, I have specific questions. Hey, can you please look at this award agreement? This is what we're going to flow down to for this federal sponsor. Can you make sure that you can meet these obligations? Because this is what's going to be expected. And if they have concerns, then it's a conversation with the principal investigator. Like, we need to really look at what their role is on this project. I mean, we really need to assume, are they really a subrecipient? Because we need to make sure that how we're budgeting in our proposal is the correct way. And, so now whenever I see an industry partner listed, it's a whole, like, jump on it right now. Let's have a discussion with the faculty member. Let's get this going because we're already limited on time for proposal. And we don't want that to happen again, right? And it may happen again. A company may say, oh yeah, it's all good because they won't look at anything we send them. And we're taking their word for it. So the only thing I can recommend is really when you see those industry partners or those international collaborators, be clear with the expectations, not just for what you need from them at the proposal time, but what's going to be needed for them at award. Those reporting requirements are also important. Sometimes it can be very burdensome. They may not have a large enough company to be able to know that they're going to need a full-time person to do the accounting and reporting. right? And so you want them to make aware of that, to make it easier. And so we don't have this last minute scramble when we have this award and now we're like, ooh, how do we do this?
Yeah, and not to end on oh my gosh, the sky is falling.
We solved it,
Yeah.
it's working great.
Yeah.
We rocked
I
it.
did have an experience with, we had a subaward to a small nonprofit in the valley that we were working with, and they just didn't understand the whole world of grant administration. And our agreement had a small cost share commitment for the subawardee, and since they weren't doing research, they were only allowed to charge the de minimis 10% rate. Well, they didn't understand any of that. And so when we got that first invoice from them, first of all, it wasn't the right format, and they didn't break out their costs and all of that. But through that conversation, one of the things we noticed is you're not charging us indirects. It's not a lot, but you can charge us 10% more than what you're billing us. Please bill us that. We want that to happen. And over the course of that relationship, and they didn't understand the cost share piece. It was like, we know you're doing this work that you're not billing us for. You just need to document that. And so through working with them, we were able to give them more money than what they were asking us for. And in the end, they gave us way more cost share than what we were asking them for. And so it ended up just through having that, it was quite a long conversation over several months and a few iterations of that invoice. But ultimately, we both came out, ahead of the game, better than what we had anticipated going into.
Yeah, in my email to a industry partner as well, I have the whole description of the de minimis rate, that this is what you can charge, and then I take them to information that talks about what it is and what's allowed. And I also reference the sponsor requirements and policy. So again, they can see that and they understand that this is a requirement. So you're giving them the information that you want them to know, because don't expect them to know that they understand what it is that you're doing, because they're not sponsor research people. They're industry. They have a different mindset, right? And so we need to help them, bring them into our world as quickly as we can, so then we can get on that same playing field and level field, and we can work together to solve problems. And if you're interested in the subrecipient email that I sent, I'm happy to share that too. I've shared it many times before, so if you're kind of curious of how I phrase things to partners, I'm happy to share that. Just send me an email. I'm happy to send it to you.
Okay, any other questions, comments from anyone? No open questions. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming to this conference. Thank you for the Next slide.
Thank you, everybody online.
And please take the surveys.
Yeah.
$5 gift card today.
Good survey.
Surveys